Life is not going to stop testing you. I want to say that plainly before anything else, not as a warning, as a fact that once you accept it completely, changes the way you respond to everything. Life will test you this year. It tested you last year. It will test you in 5 years. The tests will be different shapes, different costs, different seasons, but they will come. They always come, for everyone, without exception, without regard for whether you have already had your fair share or whether you feel ready for the next one. The question is never whether the test is coming. The question is what kind of person you are going to be when it arrives. And that question is what I want to spend the next 30 minutes answering as specifically and as honestly as I know how. I have been in enough rooms with enough people at enough different stages of difficulty to know something that most people discover too late and some people never discover at all. The test does not determine who you become. How you respond to the test determines who you become, not how you feel about it, not whether you think it is fair, not whether you had warning, how you respond. Stay with me, because I am going to tell you something about strength that most people have completely backwards, and getting it backwards is costing them years they cannot recover. Let me ask you something before we go any further. Think about the hardest season of your life so far. Not a bad day, a season, a stretch of weeks or months or years when something real was pressing down on you and not letting up. Now think about what you believed in the middle of that season, about what it meant. Most people, in the middle of a genuinely hard season, believe one or more of the following things: that the difficulty means something is fundamentally wrong with them or their life, that people who are doing better than them somehow avoided this kind of test, that the length and weight of what they are carrying is unique to them in some specific and unfair way. I want to address all three of those beliefs directly, because all three of them are wrong. And wrong beliefs held during hard seasons are not just uncomfortable, they are dangerous. They lead people to make decisions or to avoid making decisions in ways that extend the difficulty far beyond the point where it would have naturally resolved. The difficulty does not mean something is fundamentally wrong. It means you are alive and engaged with a life that matters to you. Things that don't matter to you can't hurt you. Things that test you are always things that matter. The test is, in a strange way, evidence of the life you have chosen to build and care about. The people doing better than you did not avoid difficulty. They are either in a different season right now between tests, or they are in difficulty you cannot see from the outside, because difficulty wears a different face in different families and different professions and different seasons of a single life. I have sat across from enough people who looked like they had it together from the outside to know that the outside view is almost always incomplete. And the weight you are carrying is not unique to you in an unfair way. It is the specific weight of your specific life, which is different from anyone else's. But the experience of being tested, of having something pressed down on you without obvious relief, is the most universal human experience there is. Here is what I know about this. The test is not evidence that life is against you. The test is evidence that you are still in the game, and you cannot win a game you are not in. Let me tell you about a woman named Dorothy. She was 53 years old when I met her at a small seminar in the Midwest. She had spent 30 years building a small manufacturing business with her husband. 30 years of early mornings and careful decisions and the specific kind of daily effort that most people never see because it does not look dramatic from the outside. In the span of 18 months, she lost the business to a market shift she had not seen coming, lost her husband to a sudden illness, and found herself, at 53, starting over in a way she had never once imagined would be necessary. I watched her tell this story in a room full of strangers. She told it without self-pity, without bitterness, without the specific performance of resilience that you sometimes see in people who are telling a hard story for effect. She told it the way a farmer talks about a bad season, as a real thing with real losses that happened during a specific stretch of time. And then she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "For about 3 months after my husband died, I kept asking why this happened. And one morning I woke up and realized that question had never once produced anything useful. So I started asking a different question. What do I do with this? Not why did it happen? What do I do with it? What do I do with this?" I want to hold that sentence up like a piece of glass and look at the light through it, because it contains the whole principle of staying strong when life tests you. It is not the absence of grief or fear or anger. Dorothy had all three, and she said so plainly. It is the redirection of attention from a question that produces nothing toward a question that produces something, Why is this happening to me is a question that points backward and keeps you there. What do I do with this is a question that points forward and starts moving you there. The shift between those two questions is the whole work. And it is a shift you have to make deliberately because the backward question arrives automatically and the forward question requires a choice. Here is what I know about strength during testing seasons. Strength is not the absence of difficulty. It is not the absence of pain. It is not the performance of being fine when you are not fine, or the suppression of what is genuinely hard about the season you are in. Strength is the continued choice to do the next right thing, even when everything in you would rather not. That definition matters because most people have been given a wrong one. They have been told, implicitly or explicitly, that strength means not being affected. That the strong person does not grieve, does not struggle, does not sometimes lie awake at 3 in the morning wondering how they are going to manage what is in front of them. That is not strength. That is performance. And performance in a hard season is exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with the difficulty itself. You are spending energy on the presentation of being okay. That should be going toward the actual work of getting through. Here's what I want to give you instead. Permission to be affected. And the specific understanding that being affected and being weak are not the same thing. A tree in a storm bends. The bending is not weakness. The bending is what prevents the breaking. The tree that does not bend, the one that has no give in it at all, the one that stands perfectly rigid against every wind, is the tree that snaps. Because rigidity does not protect against force. It accumulates it until the accumulated force becomes greater than the structure can bear. The person who allows themselves to feel what is genuinely hard about their season, without letting that feeling become the final verdict on their capacity to get through it, that person bends. And the bending is what carries them through winter to spring. Stop for a moment. Pause. I want you to think about something. Are you currently spending energy performing strength that you should be spending becoming it? There is a difference. And the difference is worth examining honestly before we go any further. Now, let me contrast Dorothy with someone else I knew, because contrast teaches faster than description. And I want you to see both sides of this clearly. His name was Robert. He was 48 when his business went through a serious contraction. Not a failure, a contraction. A genuinely difficult 2-year period where revenue dropped, staff had to be reduced, and the financial pressure was real and constant. Robert was smart, Robert was experienced, Robert had been through difficult periods before, and Robert spent those 2 years doing something that looked like managing the situation from the outside, but was, from the inside, something quite different. He spent those 2 years being angry about it, not taking action about it, being angry about it. He was angry at the market conditions, angry at the specific competitors he blamed for his contraction, angry at the business climate, angry at the people who had not supported him the way he felt he deserved. He cataloged the unfairness of it with tremendous energy and considerable precision, and he updated the catalog regularly, and he told anyone who would listen exactly how detailed the catalog had become. I asked him once in the middle of that period how much time he spent thinking about what he could do differently. He looked at me for a long moment, then he said, "I'm too busy dealing with what happened." Dealing with what happened. Not dealing with what to do about it, with what happened. Anger at the difficulty is understandable. I am not dismissing it. Anger is a legitimate response to real loss and real pressure and real unfairness. But here is what I know about anger that stays. It consumes the same energy that recovery requires. And you only have so much energy. If the anger is spending it, the recovery is not getting it. And the difficulty lasts exactly as long as the energy required to address it is being spent on something else. Robert's business took 5 years to return to where it had been before the contraction. Dorothy, starting from 0 at 53 with no business and no partner, had built something new within 3. Same category of difficulty, different questions asked, different places where the available energy went, completely different outcomes. The difference was not talent. The difference was not luck. The difference was a sentence. Why is this happening to me versus what do I do with this? 2 different questions. 2 different lives. Which question are you asking right now? Here is what I know about the mechanism of staying strong. Not the philosophy of it, the actual mechanism. What is happening when someone stays strong and what is happening when they don't? When life tests you, your available energy goes somewhere. It always goes somewhere. There is no neutral, no standing still, no treading water indefinitely. Energy that is not pointed at the recovery is pointed at something else, and that something else is almost always some version of why. Why did this happen? Why now? Why me? Why this particular shape and weight and timing? Why do other people seem to have easier paths? Why does the difficulty continue when you are trying so hard to address it? These are not bad questions. They are human questions. The problem is not that you ask them. The problem is that you cannot answer them definitively. The why of most hard seasons is not available to us in the moment, and often not for years afterward, if ever. You can spend enormous energy pursuing that answer and come up with nothing, or come up with an answer that does not actually help you get through the difficulty any faster. Here is what happens when you redirect that energy. When you stop asking why and start asking, what do I do with this? The energy that was going into a question without an available answer starts going into questions that do have answers. What is the one specific thing I can do today that moves me closer to through? What is the most important resource I have right now, and am I using it fully? What do I know about getting through hard things that applies to this particular hard thing? Who has been through something like this before, and what did they learn? These questions have answers, not comfortable answers, not easy answers, not answers that make the difficulty disappear, but answers that move you one day at a time in the direction of through. And through is the only destination that matters during a hard season, not back to before, through. Because who you are when you come through a genuinely hard season is not who you were when you entered it. And who you become through it is the product of what questions you asked and what energy you spent and what choices you made about where your attention and your effort went while the difficulty was pressing. That is the most important thing I know about staying strong. Through is the destination. The questions you ask determine how long it takes to get there and who you are when you arrive. Now, here is something I want to add to that framework, because I think most people understand the principle but struggle with the specific daily experience of living it. The hard season does not just produce one test. It produces 100 small ones inside the larger one. The morning you wake up and cannot find the motivation to do the one useful thing you planned. The week the progress stops and you cannot tell whether you have hit a wall or simply need more time. The conversation that does not go the way you hoped. The plan that seemed sound and turned out to be insufficient. The moment you compare where you are to where you thought you would be by now. These are the tests within the test, and they are the ones that drain most people. Not the original difficulty, but the accumulated weight of the 100 smaller discouragements that arrive inside it. Here's what I want you to know about those smaller tests. They are not evidence that you are failing. They are evidence that you are in the middle of something genuinely difficult, which is exactly where you said you were. The disappointment of a plan that did not work is not a verdict on your capacity. It is information about that specific plan. The week when progress stops is not evidence that progress is over. It is evidence that this week requires a different approach or more patience or both. I knew a man named Thomas who had spent several years rebuilding after a significant business failure. Smart man, disciplined man. He had done everything right in the reconstruction, made the right decisions, found the right partners, worked the right hours. And about 2 years in, he hit a stretch of 3 months where nothing moved. Not backward, not forward, sideways. Everything he tried seemed to produce exactly nothing. He told me about it afterward when things had resolved. He said those 3 months were harder than the failure itself, because the failure at least had a clarity to it. It was unambiguous. These 3 months were ambiguous. He could not tell if he was losing or just waiting. And the uncertainty of not knowing which one it was aided him more than either outcome would have on its own. I asked him what had gotten him through those 3 months. He said, I kept doing the small things even when they seemed pointless. Not because I was sure they would work. Because stopping felt worse than continuing. Because stopping felt worse than continuing. That is the experience of staying strong from the inside. Not certainty, not confidence that everything is going to work out. Just the specific, humble, unglamorous decision that stopping is the worst option. Most people wait for certainty before they continue. Certainty that the effort is not wasted. Certainty that the difficulty will resolve. Certainty that the next step is the right one. Certainty during hard seasons is almost never available. Continuing is always available. And continuing without certainty, because stopping feels worse than continuing, is the specific texture of what staying strong actually feels like from the inside. It does not feel heroic. It feels like the only available option that does not make things worse. That is enough. That is all it needs to feel like. Now, I want to talk about something practical, because philosophy during a hard season is useful only to the extent that it changes your daily behavior. And there are specific daily behaviors that either build strength during testing seasons or drain it. The first behavior is what I call the morning anchor. Every morning before the day's difficulty has had a chance to establish itself in your attention, you need something to anchor yourself to. Not a prayer, not a quote, not something vague, something specific. A specific person you are responsible to. A specific goal that is still worth pursuing through the difficulty. A specific reason that the work of getting through this matters. Write it down. One sentence. Read it every morning before you do anything else. Before you check the news or the messages or the account balance or whatever specific version of the difficulty presents itself to you first thing, that sentence is not going to make the difficulty smaller. It is going to make the reason for getting through it larger than the difficulty, which is a different kind of protection. You are not avoiding the storm. You are giving yourself a reason to walk through it that is more compelling than the reason to stop. Dorothy told me that her anchor in the months after she lost everything was a single sentence she wrote on an index card and put on her bathroom mirror. The sentence was, "There is still something worth building." Not, "I am going to be okay." Not, "This is going to work out." Not, "Everything happens for a reason." Those are comfortable abstractions. This was a specific assertion about the future. There is still something worth building. Every morning, before she did anything else, she read it. And every morning it reminded her that the question she needed to be asking was what to build, not why what she had built was gone. The morning anchor is not a cure, it is a direction. And direction is what a hard season most desperately needs, because a hard season without direction becomes just duration. The second behavior is what I call the smallest useful action. During a genuinely hard season, the temptation is to wait for the motivation to do something significant before doing anything at all. You are waiting to feel capable of a big move before you make any move. This is a trap, not because big moves are not important, because motivation during hard seasons is not available in advance. It is available after action. The feeling of capability does not precede the action. It follows from it. Do the smallest useful thing, not the thing that would fix everything, not the thing you would do if circumstances were better. The smallest thing you can do today that is genuinely useful to your situation. Make one phone call, read one chapter, write one paragraph, have one honest conversation you have been postponing. Do one thing that is a step, even if it is a small step, in the direction of through. That smallest useful action does something beyond its own direct impact. It tells your nervous system that you are still capable of action, that the difficulty has not paralyzed you, that you are a person who moves even in hard seasons. And that message, repeated daily through small, useful actions, builds the specific kind of confidence that no amount of waiting or planning or thinking about taking action can build. Action builds confidence. Confidence sustains action. And sustained action is what gets you through. Thomas, the man who had those 3 stalled months, told me afterward that the thing he was grateful for in retrospect was that he had kept doing the small things even when they seemed to produce nothing. Because it turned out the small things were not producing nothing. They were producing readiness. When the situation finally shifted, and it did shift, as they always do, he was ready to move because he had stayed in motion. The man who had stopped would have had to restart from stillness, which is always slower. Stay in motion, even if the motion is small, especially if the motion is small. Small motion during hard seasons is what keeps the machine running so that when the season shifts, you can accelerate rather than restart. The third behavior is the honest conversation. There is a specific kind of pride that makes hard seasons harder. The pride that refuses to let anyone see that the season is genuinely difficult. The performance of strength I described earlier. The one that spends energy you need for recovery on presenting a version of yourself that is managing better than it is. I am not asking you to broadcast your difficulty to the world. That is not what this is about. I am asking you to find one person, and tell them the truth about where you are. Not for sympathy, not for advice necessarily, just for the release of not holding the full weight of it alone. Human beings are not built to carry hard seasons in isolation. The evidence for this is everywhere, in every culture, in every recorded human tradition. When something genuinely hard happens, people gather. Not because gathering changes the difficulty, but because the isolation of difficulty is a weight added to the existing weight. And removing it is the easiest available reduction of the total load. Find your one person. Tell them the truth, not the managed version, the truth. And let the conversation be what it is without trying to control what they take from it or how they respond. The simple act of telling the truth about where you are to one person who receives it, honestly, does something that no amount of internal management of the difficulty can replicate. Dorothy told her truth to her sister in a phone call that lasted 3 hours, about 6 weeks after her husband died. She said she spent the first hour crying, the second hour talking, and the third hour listening to her sister talk about things they had never talked about before. She said she hung up feeling like she had put down something heavy that she had been carrying one-handed without knowing it. You do not need the 3-hour call. You need the honest conversation, one person, this week. I want to address something I know some of you are sitting with right now because I have been in enough rooms during enough hard seasons to know that this objection exists. You're thinking, Jim, my situation is genuinely different. My difficulty is not the normal kind. The weight I am carrying is not something that responds to morning anchors and small, useful actions and honest conversations. And I want to answer that directly. You're right that I do not know the specific details of your situation. You're right that difficulty varies, and some seasons are heavier than others, and some losses are genuinely larger, and some pressures are genuinely more sustained. But here is what I know that does not vary. The principles of getting through do not scale with the size of the difficulty. They apply at every scale. A small, useful action is a small, useful action, whether you are managing a bad month or rebuilding from the worst season of your life. An honest conversation is an honest conversation, whether the difficulty is moderate or profound. A morning anchor works for Dorothy, who lost everything at 53, the same way it works for someone managing a difficulty a fraction of that weight. The principles are not calibrated to the difficulty. They are available at every level of it. I have watched people with enormous difficulties apply these principles and get through. I have watched people with moderate difficulties refuse to apply them and stay stuck. The size of the difficulty was not the determining factor. The principles applied was the determining factor. And the question is not whether they apply to your specific situation. They do. The question is whether you will apply them. Here is the practice. Plain language, available starting tonight. Write the answers to 3 questions on paper, physical paper with your own handwriting. The first question is, what is the one thing about my current situation that I have the most direct ability to affect? Not the biggest thing, not the thing that would fix everything. The one thing where your direct action has the most direct impact. Name it specifically. The second question is, what is the morning anchor sentence that makes getting through this worth the effort? One sentence, specific, real. The reason the work of getting through this matters. Write it on something you will see when you wake up tomorrow morning and every morning after. The third question is, who is the one person I can tell the truth to about where I actually am right now? Name them, not a category, a person, and contact them this week before you have talked yourself out of it. 3 questions, 1 piece of paper, tonight. That is the practice. It is not dramatic. It is not exciting. But here is what I know about undramatic practices done consistently during hard seasons. They are what get you through, not the inspiration, not the single dramatic moment of decision. The undramatic daily practice, held to without negotiation, that accumulates into the evidence your own nervous system needs to believe that you are still capable of getting through. Dorothy came back to a seminar I was running about 4 years after the first time I met her. She walked in looking like she had earned something. Not comfortable, earned. I asked her what the hardest part of those years had been. She said, staying curious about what came next instead of angry about what had already happened. Staying curious about what came next instead of angry about what had already happened. That sentence is the whole talk. Everything I have said for the last 30 minutes is a different version of that sentence. Anger is backward-facing. Curiosity is forward-facing. And the direction your energy faces during a hard season is the single most determinative variable in how the season ends. Here is one more thing I want to add to that, because I think it matters and I do not want to leave it out. Curiosity is not optimism. I am not asking you to believe everything is going to be fine. I do not know that everything is going to be fine for you any more than you do. And false optimism during hard seasons is just another form of the performance I asked you to drop earlier. It costs the same energy for a less honest result. Curiosity is something different. Curiosity does not require you to know how the season ends. It only requires you to be interested in finding out, to be genuinely oriented toward what comes next, open to it, willing to move toward it even without knowing what it is. That is all. Be curious about what comes next. Not certain, not optimistic in a way that requires you to pretend. Just curious. Curious enough to ask, what do I do with this every morning instead of why did this happen? Curious enough to do the smallest useful thing even when it seems to produce nothing yet. Curious enough to tell one person the truth and see what happens. That curiosity, held consistently through the difficulty, is what carries people through. Not strength in the dramatic sense. Not certainty. Not the absence of hard days inside the hard season. Just the continued willingness to face forward. To be interested in what comes next. To move toward through rather than staying in the gravity of what already happened. Life is going to keep testing you. Not because it is against you, because you are still in it. And being tested is what being in it feels like. What you do with those tests, how you face them, where you point your energy, what questions you ask, and what small useful things you do, and what truth you are willing to tell, and who you tell it to. All of that accumulates, not into a dramatic breakthrough, into a person. The person who comes out the other side of a genuine test with more capacity, more wisdom, more honest knowledge of what they are actually made of is not someone who was never affected by the difficulty. That person is someone who was affected and kept moving anyway, who bent in the storm and did not break, who asked what to do with it instead of why it happened, who found, in the middle of the hardest season they had faced, the morning anchor that made getting through it more important than the alternative. That person is available to you, not someday, not when the difficulty passes, in the middle of it, right now. That is when becoming them is actually possible, not around the test, through it. Thank you.